Hearing is an important sense for the survival of multiple animal species, including humans. Hearing is humanity's most primitive sense, which is evidenced by how fast the sound association is for humans. Due to this natural affinity to sound, humans have always expressed themselves in many different audible ways, such as with speech and music. So, for thousands of years, humans have used sounds in many forms and have invented multiple ways to assist them to create and reproduce different sounds. Sound design is part of this evolutionary process, from extremely basic uses for religious purposes in ancient history to the modern digitalized audio. It has played a role in many forms of entertainment, including theater, cinema, TV, and video games. In video games specifically, it plays a very important role, as it is capable of enhancing the verisimilitude and entertainment factors of games. Even though sound design plays a very important role in video games, it can be easily taken for granted. And understandably so, as good sound design is implemented in a way that it feels to the player as a completely natural part of the game's context and narrative. A well-made sound effect can be appreciated, but most of the time it shouldn't keep distracting the player from the game, as that would probably mean that it's either completely out of place, poorly made, used way too much, or used poorly. It has to be well immersed into the world of the game. If you're watching a blacksmith hitting his hammer on the anvil, you can expect the sound of iron hitting iron, with a certain rhythm to it. Should the sound repeat irregularly or sound soft, it will very likely throw you off. Now, when imagining something that is not from our reality, and exclusive to fantasy settings, such as the sound of a mage's spell being cast, then the sound designer needs to either try to approach it as much as they can to real-world sounds, or try to create something totally new based on visuals. A sound should also match the feeling of the visual action. For example, a rewarding action should be matched with a satisfactory sound, something that the player should strive for. A great example of this is the hit marker sound effects that have become common in shooting games. It is incredibly functional and informative, as it gives you immediate feedback regarding your accuracy, but also extremely satisfying to listen to. Information is always important. Sounds are the best way to immediately tell your player what he's doing right and what he's doing wrong. Clear audio indicators for success or failure eventually become second nature to your players, and they become even more effective when combined with strong visual cues, especially as game screens get filled with information. Whether realistic or not, a sound needs to be above all easily recognizable. That means that you want clear outliners to differentiate one sound from another, both for clarity's sake and memorability. For example, footsteps sound different when walking in steel and concrete, so you need to make two distinct sounds for each terrain. This is particularly important in stealth or multiplayer games, as steps on steel ground will produce louder sounds, increasing the likelihood of enemies detecting the player. Great sound design respects one or more of four factors: immersion, emotion, information, and recognition. With that in mind, it's time for a few examples. Many will refer to the Super Mario games as some of the greatest examples for well-done sound effects in early video game history. Sounds associated with Mario jumping, hitting blocks with his head, and even dying are indeed memorable. For me personally though, the earliest example I had of the sound effect clarity was with the Sonic the Hedgehog series. The jumping, the spin dash, the spring jump, popping effects when hitting enemies or power-ups, the coins falling when Sonic gets hit, the sound of braking after running, and even Sonic dying, all come clear to my mind just by imagining the Sonic game, or even watching or playing it with no sound, because the sounds feel like they match the animations perfectly. They sound like they look like they should sound. Which is why, even entering the 3D era, the original sound effects have been kept universal throughout the series, with very few modifications done to them. Overall, the sounds give you a matching feedback to your action, and they are always matching Sonic's movement, and are honestly really fun to repeat and hear them over and over again. Sonic sound effects, much like the ones in Mario games, are as memorable as the music, the stages, and the Blue Hedgehog himself. After hearing these effects over and over again, even if you didn't have any contact with the game by playing or watching it for 10 years or so, you will most likely immediately associate the sound effects with each action. This is an example that is about as raw as it can get. It's creative, it's effective, it matches the game, gives you the necessary information, it is memorable. As the man Todd would say, it just works. For the second example, we move to 2004 to talk about the blockbuster that for over a decade kept teenagers and adults up for more nights than they want to admit it. One of traditional media's favorite source of crazy gaming stories, World of Warcraft, also known as WoW. Besides the countless boogeyman tales of addiction, recklessness, negligency, and overall craziness and detachment from reality, WoW is remembered by many as one of their most important experiences in games. Countless memories were shared online about guildmates, friends made along the way, and the social aspects of it. But besides this, the world itself is very well constructed, and many of those who played it will remember about specific zones, with good memories over its many expansions. The unforgettable dry savanna ambience of the Barrens and its chat, the gloomy and spooky atmosphere and the haunted Tirsfall Glades, the calm green forest of Elwyn, the Scottish Highlands-like homage to the Loch Ness, Loch Modan, the tranquil forests of Teldrassil, the relaxing snowfields of both Winterspring and Dunmorrow, the never-setting sun image of Eversong Woods that slowly fades out to make way for the saddening dark woods of the Ghostlands, the breathtaking yet peaceful visage of the otherworldly Nagrand, the grounded, lively, and chill Grizzly Hills. While there may be many divergences over what the game has become, what was the best period, and so on, WoW has been overall an extremely well-made game, with an incredible world when talking about the RPG part of it. There may be many complaints about the endgame content and the written lore, but there are very few criticisms to be made about the world itself. The sound design of the game has been especially very well handled over the years. For starters, the ability sound effects are incredibly clear and distinguishable. If you play the game with sound on, you clearly can tell what is happening in combat if you turn off your screen. The sounds inform you clearly of what is being done, match the motions that you see incredibly well, and just feel right. Most of the enemies also have their own iconic sound effects that consolidate their uniqueness. The most famous example is, well, The Fell River definitely has one of the most memorable enemy sound effects in the game, that invoked the fear of many low-level players adventuring in Hellfire Peninsula. Other examples of iconic enemy sound effects include the unplayable trolls found in Classic and Cataclysma dungeons, Quillboars, gnolls, ghouls, banshees, dragons, and the various playable races. The game's sound design also has a very important role in making the zones feel more alive, with sound effects that could definitely go unnoticed by most players over a span of 10 years playing the game. But they are very important pieces that add up to the verisimilitude of the world of Warcraft. For the Burning Crusade specifically, there is a 4-minute behind the scenes video that explains how many of those sound effects were made, and explains the design philosophy behind them. I will link it in the description. In the fantasy and RPG genres, there are many examples should be given of well-made game sound design. However, one that ended up standing out for me, even though initially didn't, was Oblivion. Oblivion is a memorable game for many reasons, from its story, to its soundtrack, to its interesting NPC dialogues that generated a ton of memes.
Hail!
What is it now?
Farewell.
The Tiber Septim Hotel is a nice place. It's not cheap, though.
It's probably the finest inn in all of Cyrodiil.
I've heard others say the same.
Do you believe any of that talk about more Oblivion gates opening all over the place?
Yes.
Good
No
news
doubt.
from Kvatch for a
How
change.
goes-
Talking.
Last of the
But when talking about the Elder Scrolls series, I probably would say that Skyrim is overall an improvement over Oblivion. When talking about sound design specifically, the one exception would be the lockpicking system. While I took it for granted for a long while, as a lot of players might have when playing Oblivion, it was until immensely frustrated with it, I did what most players do nowadays. I looked for a tutorial on YouTube. When reading the comments, one thing caught my attention, a guy commenting that he preferred Oblivion's lockpicking because the sound is clearer and made it easier for him to perform the mechanic, as he is blind. And yes, you can confirm it by checking his channel, he is indeed blind. There is no better testament for good sound design than actually hearing from a blind person that they can understand what is going on because of the sound effects themselves, as all the information that they process about your game is done through audio. Which brings us to our final example. In fighting games, players have to make constant split-time decisions to react to what their opponents are doing. Where they are, if they whiffed the move, if they didn't block a hit, if they jumped recklessly. A good chunk of it comes with visual cues, so many would think that it would be an unplayable genre for those who are visually impaired. However, in a 2017 Street Fighter V tournament, a player by the name Blind Warrior Sven made a clear example that it is possible to play fighting games without sight by winning his first tournament match and even reacting accordingly and punishing what his opponent was doing purely based on the sound of the game. Sven became blind at the age of 5 due to cancer. The release of Street Fighter II happened a short period after this. He was very happy that he could play the game and understand what was going on purely based on sound. He kept playing fighting games until adulthood, and praised the improvements made in the series' sound design in Street Fighter V. According to him, much like regular players experience that reaction to moves becomes second nature once they see the animations repeated a lot, it also becomes natural and very plausible for a sightless player to react to what is happening by hearing the sound effects over and over again. Sven himself particularly wears headphones to fully concentrate on the sounds that are happening in-game. Street Fighter V sounds are especially precise, as the sound also changes depending on where on the screen the player is. If he is on the right, his move sounds come from the right. If he is from the left, sounds come from the left. Jumping, dashing, and crouching produce clear sounds. By paying enough attention, even the steps of each player can be heard. And the sound in the game is so precise that just by listening to that, a player can tell where his opponent is and how far he is. The blocking and hit sounds are very easily told apart, and each move has a unique sound matching their weight. With enough practice, sightless players can even tell if a move comes as an overhead or a low because of each unique sound. So as weird as it may sound, even playing defense properly is entirely possible. In other fighting games there have been examples of players who played with no vision, such as Sightless Combat in Killer Instinct, who is also an accessibility consultant for game companies, and Blind Wizard, who around the same time as Sven also won his first competitive match, not in Street Fighter though, but in Super Smash Bros. 4. What makes Sven's example with Street Fighter particularly special though, is that it highlights extremely well the quality of Capcom's sound design, as the sound alone was enough for the player to fully understand what was going on in the game. And while in Street Fighter V there were improvements, in playing Street Fighter has been a possibility since Street Fighter II, which makes the Street Fighter series an example of excellent fighting game sound design being done for over 30 years. And that's it for the video. Sound design is an aspect of game design that has always interested me. Partially because my grandfather was a sound designer, so very early in life I heard from his experiences how these sounds were made, and partially because, even though it's a very important and interesting part of game design, don't teach their students at all on how to make sound design. And the ones that do teach it, do it very quickly, without any depth at all. This is most likely due to the deceptively simple nature of sound design, which leads to the problem that, not rarely, game companies may struggle to find a sound designer. And they end up hiring people from other areas, because a lot of people that want to design games end up forgetting that this is a thing and it's very important. Anyways, this is my first time making a video in this format, and there are more to come talking about games. So if you like this type of video, please like and subscribe, and comment down below with any suggestions you guys might have. Thank you all for watching.